26 people registered, and I know we have quite a group here today, so I am very excited to share our work and see how we can support the important work that you're already doing. We at ALIGHT are very glad to be working with CICASA to reach the different regions and help make legal resources more available in Colorado to community organizations and the survivors of human trafficking that you serve. As we talked about in the little summary, we will be addressing a number of things with this presentation, starting with an overview of signs to help with identifying survivors of human trafficking, talking about survivors' legal needs. So in a way, it will be a mini law lesson, but hopefully painless. And then jumping into how service providers and advocates like you can help with these legal problems by connecting to free help from the legal community. And that's where we can walk you through our program and our tool, and in the end offer some more resources too for wherever you're at, to make sure that you've got the diversity of resources and sense of the different services that are going on that you can also reach out to in addition to us. So at the very outset, before I even jump in, I really want to stress that my overall goal for this training with you all is to help alert you to the fact that when you are dealing with human trafficking survivors and they're telling you their stories and you're learning about their problems, that most of the time they have legal issues. They are having nuts and bolts legal problems with which lawyers can help. And there are lawyers from law firms and private practice across different areas of law that want to come in and help with these services. So let's really get to work and connect those legal services to the survivors. So that's a little bit of an overview. So to get started, we're really looking at how survivors are right now disconnected from lawyers that can help them. This disconnection may be due to different reasons. It may be due to geographic distances, or maybe the survivors or the organizations they're working with may not have those relationships with the lawyers or may not be aware of where those legal resources are. And so ALIGHT really comes in to engage and enlist pro bono lawyers to fight for the rights of human trafficking survivors. And we bring in technology, innovative technology to address that disconnection. So that's really the area where we're working with. And we have a multidisciplinary team, and we're bringing in a multidisciplinary approach. We are working at the intersection of law, technology, and human trafficking. So that's really what's specific about our work, to make sure that connection between the survivors and the free legal help happens, so that survivors have all the possible resources that we can all muster together as we try to take care of them and help them rebuild their lives, put the pieces of their lives back together, get out of that cycle of violence and vulnerability, and really get into a stable and empowered place. So I will talk a great deal about how we're working in this area of increasing the delivery of legal services and the specific roles that lawyers have to play in supporting the work that you're already doing. The lawyers in our programs we'll go into, we're really looking at civil law, criminal law, and family law, and we'll go into some of the specific details under those categories. So we are here to provide that technical assistance in the connection, to really facilitate the connection. ALIGHT as an organization is not providing the legal services itself. We do not do direct services or provide legal representation, but we are helping make that connection happen. So that's really where our work focuses. And in our team, we're bringing in very diverse expertise to make that whole solution work. My own background is as an attorney. I first started working in human trafficking in 2008 with a domestic violence agency in New York called Sanctuary for Families. That's how I first got hooked into this work. And then I was doing human rights development, and I worked on human trafficking in the U.S. and internationally. I also focused on creating partnerships and successful partnerships between pro bono lawyers and pro bono law firms and human rights organizations, civil society organizations, nonprofits, to make sure that all those great resources, professional, high-level, skilled resources that want to contribute to this society we're all working in, to the people we're ultimately trying to serve, that they are connecting in the right way to those organizations that are working with these populations. And so I did a fair bit of that work, and you know, most recently I've been speaking much more and invited to present the work that we're doing with ALIGHT at places like the UN Commission on the Status of Women and the Princeton Center for Information Technology and Policy, to specifically talk about the role that technology, the possibilities that technology opens up if we use it well and responsibly and ethically to work better and help survivors. So that's a little bit about my background as the founder and executive director of ALIGHT. We have members of the team that are also coming in with different backgrounds. Our director of outreach and partnerships, Kristen Berg, who is another name to hear from ALIGHT. She will be another main point of contact. She has a background in international human rights and working with survivor leaders in human trafficking, and she spent a great deal of time with the international organization Equality Now. We also have members of the team that are coming in with technology expertise and entrepreneurial expertise, so very much a multidisciplinary approach. That's a little bit about us. The three areas where we focus on is building technology-based models for improving the delivery of legal services to survivors, which is what this workshop will be focusing on explaining. Developing best practices at the intersection of law, technology, and human trafficking. And finally, building the field to reduce barriers in response by opening up channels and making sure we're bringing in new resources and new advocates and collaborating in a better way. And that's really where our work with you is critical, because we need the frontline providers, and we need the lawyers, and we need everyone to collaborate and connect and work better so that we can do a better job together. So that's a little bit of our background, and here are some of our partners that we are grateful to be working with, and together we're engaging in that conversation and in that work of creating the next generation of solutions for human trafficking. So before I get started with my piece, I would love to ask Josh if you could run a poll. I would love to hear who's online with us now and have a sense of how many of you have assisted a human trafficking survivor. And if you can select I have not, I am not sure. Poll in progress. Fantastic. So 54% have, 27% have not, and 20% I am not sure. Thank you very much. It's very interesting. So it looks like we have a range of familiarity here. Let me open up. I believe I have to open up the big one again. Is that working, Josh? Are we back on with the full screen?
Yes, you are.
Fantastic. So human trafficking and sexual assault. As the poll showed, and as we know, many of you are already seeing human trafficking survivors in the populations you're serving. You're already doing this work. You're identifying these survivors, and you may be at different points actually with working with survivors of human trafficking. Some of you may be starting to gather resources about how to identify them. Some of you may have suspicions that you're working with survivors and are curious about more resources, and others may also be thinking, okay, we do work with survivors, but we need even more resources and we need an even more comprehensive plan. So there's a natural, in many ways, it's not surprising that human trafficking survivors are showing up in agencies working on sexual assault. There's quite a lot of similarities, unfortunately, across how perpetrators operate and choose their targets in these two areas, as well as how myths can hinder proper identification. So it's quite a lot of parallels. Coercion, of course, as you're familiar with, extends beyond physical force and restraint, which is a very common element and a very nuanced element that comes into play for human trafficking. And then finally, survivors may not be self-identifying or recognizing their experiences of exploitation or assault, especially as they're walking through your doors for the first time or as you're meeting them for the first time. And just as you are already aware, it may take, that's where your training and your expertise comes into play, because you're building those relationships, you're eliciting their stories, you're learning more about what is happening in their lives. Another very important and I think almost organic parallel, because human trafficking and sexual assault both deal with vulnerable populations and those that are recovering from very abusive situations. There's a similar need to be sensitive to language, just as in your work you are working with survivors and using empowering language and focusing on resilience and things like that. A lot of those very same issues are translating over to work with human trafficking survivors. Maybe a particular point to emphasize, and this goes to that self-identification piece, is because of the prevalence of victim blaming or stigma in our society, it may be particularly harder for survivors of trafficking, those who have experienced sexual exploitation, to identify themselves as sex trafficking survivors, and so that could add on some of that complexity. But hopefully with some of the issues we'll be going through, it could provide a starting point for you to see the signs and build that relationship. Human trafficking, so it's a tricky and very complex area of life, and so it ends up being a very tricky and complex area of law and policy. This is the federal definition. It relies really on recognizing that there are 3 elements to human trafficking that I will talk about a little bit: act, means, and purpose. And so human trafficking, even as a field or as a concept, in many ways is only about 17 years old as movement, and people are still sort of coming up to terms. Is this a new word for something that we've seen in many ways, in many forms? And in many ways it is. Luckily, with the federal law and Colorado state law, these concepts are starting to recognize more of the breadth of experiences that survivors have and some of the more nuanced situations. And so specifically, physical force is not a necessary component of recognizing human trafficking. There are other more subtle forms of coercion that could be taking place that you can see. So the 3 elements, act, means, and purpose, you can see just with some of these examples listed out, human trafficking comes in many forms, and that's because a lot of these elements can be coming together in different ways. There's not one type of a survivor. In fact, the more we're working this area, probably the more surprised we see about how many different shapes and forms human trafficking takes. But as an example, for when someone is trying to figure out, by this formula, is there a survivor? If someone, let's say, was recruited for work as an act, and the means is through fraud, and then the purpose is for forced labor, that's sort of how some of these different pieces of the 3 elements can come together. And of course, there's many, many varieties of this. So these are the 3 elements, and the key and most nuanced one is means. What are the traffickers' methods of controlling? And so it is not necessarily force and physical signs, even though that tends to be the most recognizable. There's also fraud and coercion to pay attention to. So fraud with false offers of employment, false offers of marriage or a better life, also many different varieties that coercion can take place. Threats, debt bondage, when the abuser is creating a climate of fear, is abusing the legal system to further press down on the survivor. And I should also mention these elements, they're coming up in life, and so as you're talking to whoever you're talking to, there's also a great deal of sensitivity. It's also so particular to the individual. And so, for example, some of these are showing up in very culturally specific ways where talking to one individual, you realize, wow, culturally or where they're at, what was happening to them was a real viable threat, whereas maybe for someone else it would not come off as a threat. So there's also a cultural context element to these three elements. And this slide shows the Colorado state definition, the original human trafficking and smuggling laws that were enacted in Colorado were then repealed and reenacted with many improvements in May 2014 and are now more in line with the federal standards and international standards that are using this broader definition that realizes with coercion taking place, there's just so many different forms and so many ways that people are being coerced into human trafficking. So these are the definitions, and I wanted to make sure to include some red flags so you can get some pictures, some illustrations. Although of course I have to stress that these are just a highlight and a starting point for thinking about, wow, here's some ways that this can show up. But it always works with whoever you're working with. You know, it's always so also individual specific because people are coming in with their stories. You're listening to different factors. It's almost, you may have a gut feeling, and that may lead you to ask more questions, and maybe with trust, some more elements may be coming out, some more red flags. A lot of times it's not something that would fall under any one line or any one formula. It's you getting to know the individual and understanding, wow, even from the totality of the circumstances, like something's going on here, something's off. And human trafficking really comes to bear with that vulnerability and exploitation emphasis. Human trafficking is essentially about exploitation of someone for sex, labor, or services. When someone in a vulnerable position is being taken advantage of for someone else's profit. And so especially when you return to sort of the essence of what human trafficking is, you realize, okay, this is showing it, this shows up in our life in so many different ways. But here are some examples to think about this. When someone is not free to leave or come and go as he or she wishes, someone who is under 18 and is providing commercial sex acts. So in the federal definition and in the state definition, as you saw, whenever you have a minor who is engaged in commercial sex, with that situation, it is not necessary to look for force, fraud, or coercion. That it's understood that if they are a minor, they did not consent to engage in commercial sex. So as another example, someone is in the commercial sex industry and has a pimp or manager or domestic partner who's abusive. Someone who's unpaid, paid very little, or paid only through tips. Someone who's working excessively long and or unusual hours. Someone who owes large debt is unable to pay it off. Someone tells you about their situation when they were recruited through false promises and were given a different picture about the nature of the work that they were about to do. Some more flags here. Someone with poor physical health, including lacking health care, showing signs of physical and or sexual abuse. Seeing someone who lacks control over his or her money and or identification documents, that's a red flag. Someone who is not allowed to or able to speak for themselves, especially if there's a third party that insists on being present or insists on speaking for them. Someone is claiming to just be visiting the area and is unable to clarify where their stay. In that situation, you know, sometimes there's traffickers are moving a person or a group of people around from area to area, and so the individual may not even be based in Colorado. They may be moved around. A loss of sense of time is a strong indicator when there's multiple inconsistencies in the person's story. These are all important signs. And so here also some more examples, and again, this is not an exhaustive list. This is just to sort of get a sense of what are some of the scenarios, and I'll go into some more scenarios in depth. But there's really such a wide variety of situations, and especially in Colorado, when we consider that it's an agriculture state and there's quite a lot of industries going on, there's labor exploitation can take place with someone being trafficked into agriculture or into to work on construction sites or in restaurants, so really quite a wide array of forms of human trafficking. But here we have some examples with a domestic worker forced to work very long hours for very little pay and subjected to physical violence. A scenario where someone's a runaway teen forced to trade sex for shelter or food. A foreign farm worker or sheep herder whose passport has been confiscated and they're being paid significantly less than they were promised when they came. A person working at a strip club whose boyfriend uses threats to make the individual continue working and turn over their earnings. Someone in an intimate relationship where there's a clear power differential or language barrier and you're seeing signs of exploitation. You know, this can also alert you to issues. Someone being exploited by a helping profession, which unfortunately takes place very frequently too, where people, teachers, priests, police officers, therapists, those that are in positions of trust or authority, also abusing that relationship with an individual to get them to do what they want for their own profit. Just as important, I think, as thinking of certain concrete examples is also to take a step back and clarify some of the misconceptions or popular ways that human trafficking is often being talked about, because that can also stand in the way of our ability to recognize what's happening in front of us as a possible human trafficking situation. So there's quite a lot of myths, and I wanted to spend a few minutes to debunk some of them. Perhaps one of the biggest myths in human trafficking is that most survivors experience sex rather than labor trafficking. And in fact, that just tends to be because media and public discourse tends to be around sex trafficking, when in fact it's both sex and labor trafficking. And again, as I mentioned, there's plenty of labor trafficking happening across different industries such as agriculture and hospitality and construction and things like that. There's also a myth that sexual assault or violence only happens in sex trafficking situations, not in labor trafficking, which is again false, because many labor trafficking survivors have experienced sexual assault. This is a big one, that human trafficking requires movement or border crossing, and maybe that's because it's been conflated and confused with this idea of smuggling, or because human trafficking has the word traffic in it, but actually human trafficking is not about the movement of someone. It could be a part of it, it could take place, but that's not really what human trafficking is about. Human trafficking is about the exploitation of someone. And so no transportation or movement is required under Colorado law or federal law. We talked a little bit about this with human trafficking requiring physical force, and no, U.S. law recognizes subtler forms of coercion are also taking place in human trafficking, such as threats or fraud, and as addressed on those earlier slides. There may be some confusion too around, well, if a person had consented to a situation but then changed their mind, that can't be human trafficking anymore. When in fact it's not about that, as long as there's force, fraud, or coercion at any point, even if it comes later, that could still be human trafficking. So for example, someone that is promised certain working conditions and they consent to them, and then they show up and it's a completely different situation, even though they consented on the front end, they were still perhaps coerced down the line, and so that it's still possible to, you know, to find human trafficking there. And then also that most survivors in the U.S. are from foreign countries and are undocumented, and that is also false. Many survivors are U.S. citizens, and also human trafficking survivors who are foreign nationals may be here on visas, on work visas. So it's not that one picture. There's many different many, many different scenarios that are taking place. So with this conversation, I wanted to jump into a specific scenario, getting to a place where you you have a sense of generally how to identify survivors. Okay, even if I can see someone in front of me as a potential human trafficking survivor, what do we do, and what is the role of law here? Is it even relevant? And I really want to stress that the problems, the daily issues, the day-to-day kind of challenges that survivors are coming to you with, you may be thinking in terms of concrete services, but they are also in need of concrete legal services. There are very specific ways that lawyers can help with these sort of daily problems that survivors have. So in this scenario, we have Jesse, who comes in to the community organization with multiple issues to resolve. And as you know, usually there are multiple issues at the same time, and they're all over the place, and there's a lot to handle. So Jesse lives in public housing and just received an eviction notice, excuse me, and does not know why. Also, there's a misdemeanor arrest warrant with an upcoming court date for stealing as a juvenile. Jesse has crippling medical and credit card bills that have been piling up as Jesse struggled to transition. And so now debt collections agencies are sending letters threatening suit. So here you have someone in front of you, and there's a lot going on. How does this relate to law? Well, it relates to law because these are actually legal issues. So lawyers come in as you're thinking about client safety, housing issues, debt issues, all these sort of life problems. Most of the time have a legal dimension to it where that individual needs an advocate, needs a professional to help them fight for their rights and get back on their feet. With the second scenario, I wanted to also discuss this idea that is all too real, where individuals who are rebuilding and moving on from that initial abuse, they have a pretty long trajectory of recovery. Even if the abuse occurred years and years ago, issues still come up related to their initial trauma, related to their ability, or as they try to navigate and transition into life and rebuild their lives. And so here we have Alex, who's been recovering over a period of years from an abusive relationship where Alex was trafficked. And even down the line, as Alex transitions to working in an office environment and is trying to navigate all that complexity, Alex may be experiencing a lot of triggering situations. There may be issues on the one hand where Alex is trying to find out, what are my rights as an employee? What's going on? And then also there could actually be actual harassment by a coworker happening, So these are also legal issues because they relate to Alex's ability to understand, what are my legal rights? What are my options? What can I do going forward? And lawyers who have this expertise can offer very valuable advice and input and support in this process. So there could be one legal issue where Alex needs to talk to an attorney to better understand, okay, what are my employer's legal obligations for creating a safe work environment? Because I need some clarity. What are my rights here generally about a safe work environment? And then there could also be specific questions like, this is happening. What are my options? Do I have a place, do I have a claim of harassment or sexual discrimination, or even what's going on, or can you support me with this? And a lot of times survivors also just need to ask what's going on. Yes, or is this, what are my rights? What are my rights? What are my options? I'm seeing it this way. Do I even have any possibilities under the law where someone can help? And so in those ways, lawyers can really come in to offer critical assistance. With the next couple of slides, we have legal needs examples across civil law, criminal law, and family law. And this is just a sample list of to give you guys an idea of how questions and issues are coming up for survivors across all different legal areas, because survivors are living real lives. Their stories are complicated. Their stories are as diverse as they are, and so their legal needs can end up coming in at unlikely places or all over the place. And so just in the civil law category, there could be questions about benefits, about tax, about debt issues, just a whole myriad of different legal issues which actually rely on different types of legal expertise, because a tax lawyer is often a very different lawyer than the one that can go and help file for bankruptcy, or who can advise and apply with housing benefits. These end up being very different legal specializations, and yet the same survivor needs all these services. And so here are some examples from civil law, and here are some examples from criminal law, where clearing criminal records, victim-inclusive advocacy in the criminal justice system, and survivor may need help with dealing with offenses or charges, citation orders, just across the board. And then, of course, family law example, where questions and issues across divorce, child custody, child abduction, child abuse, domestic violence, court appointment. And I really urge you too, with especially with this piece, if you're curious to learn more about how do legal services come into play for human trafficking, please reach out to us, and we're happy to provide this list, and we're happy to talk with you and work through more resources that can help kind of make that connection between what a survivor is experiencing and how that is a legal issue or a legal right that is being impacted, for which a lawyer could come in and help. And so we have this list, and we're continuing to build it out, and we're continuing to build out our resources to help explain that these are really just regular concrete problems that survivors have. They may not be thought about. Sometimes law may be thought of, oh, lawyers sort of an afterthought, it's more of a long-term thing, but a lot of these issues are also immediate pressing needs to help with these emergencies that survivors are dealing with. And so especially if you want this list or other resources, please reach out to us at connect@alightnet.org, and I'll have that email again throughout in the presentation, but we've got this as a separate handout if you're interested. And so where does ALIGHT come in? So we have here an illustration of how we're bridging these two sides. We're here to connect survivors to critical legal assistance using technology to make that efficient, in real time, faster, better, easier for everyone, so that those connections happen. And if you think about Uber or Lyft, this works under a similar principle where, on the one hand, someone needs something and they put that into the system. On the other hand, you have a whole group of resources that are sort of on standby, and when there's a need that comes in that matches those resources, specifically when it matches certain of those resources, that match happens and that connection happens, and then we can get to work. And so in our situation, we have survivors needing legal expertise on one side, and then on the other side we have our resource network of lawyers that we've built and are continuing to build across family law, civil law, and criminal law that have different kinds of legal expertise. And the thing to stress, for me to stress here, is when a request for legal help is going into the app, it is going through one of our community partners. It is going through a service provider or an advocate that we are working with, who is working with a survivor. And they're putting that request for legal assistance in on behalf of the survivors. So we're not expecting for survivors to have this app or to know how to use it or to know how to ask for legal help. This is really where we come in to partner with community organizations that are using the system to make that connection. And it's designed to be a better way to connect, so that service providers who are already overworked and dealing with so much are not spending precious time trying to hunt down business card, someone's business card, or use listservs, or play phone tag, or ask around, do you know a tax lawyer that has this availability and also a family lawyer for this that has this availability? That's really, no one has time for that. We need to save time on coordination, save time on administration to make sure we're getting those lawyers that want to help to the survivors as fast and easy as possible. And so this connection tool cuts down on those steps, how many steps it takes to get the survivor to the legal help that they need. With needs matching, which is the main feature of this technology tool that we're working with, we've got the two sides again. And so the need side are the service providers from all these various types of agencies, and the common factor is these are community organizations that are working with vulnerable populations, because again, human trafficking is so related to vulnerability. It's not necessary that it has to be a human trafficking organization that's working with survivors. We're seeing that it's actually organizations that are working with marginalized groups of various sorts that through discovery and attention are realizing, wow, this person's also actually a survivor of human trafficking. And as a survivor of human trafficking, they actually have access to very particular resources and additional resources, and they have additional rights under the law. And so, yes, how do we serve these people as part of the populations we serve in domestic violence, in sexual assault, in working with LGBTQI, and all these various populations? And so that's one side of the equation. And then on the other side is that pool of professional expertise across family law, criminal law, civil litigation, tax law, general, commercial, and contract law. And so how to get to these lawyers? Well, with our program, and this is that email that I was mentioning earlier, connect@alightnet.org. So if you, as you're listening to this, are thinking, I actually have a human trafficking survivor right now, or I've worked with survivors before and I want to know how to be able to access lawyers fast for the next time that it shows up. We wanted to provide sort of a overview of how this would work, and then you would get in touch with us and we would really nail down the program and make sure everyone's comfortable with the process. But in broad strokes, what would happen is you would identify a potential survivor with legal needs, I guess referencing those red flags or legal needs examples. And through this program too, it could be that you believe they're trafficked, the person believes they're trafficked. You may not even be comfortable exactly about doing that screening yourself. So you could still access legal support. You would have the survivor call our community partner who would do the screening, who is an expert in identifying survivors, and that community partner would post the survivor's request for legal assistance through the app, because that community partner is already in our system. And then when a lawyer or lawyers respond to those requests for assistance, the community partner would facilitate that connection and help manage that connection between the survivor and the lawyer. So that's a way for you right now to be able to connect to the lawyers that we have in our system to make sure that they can help you. Again, please, my broken record, the broken record part of me keeps saying, please keep thinking of your survivors and the issues they're encountering. And this is the legal lesson. The issues they're encountering are very often legal needs. And they have very diverse legal needs, as we know, because they're coming with very diverse issues. And so across housing issues, safety issues, work-related issues, even if it's not in that abbreviated list that we showed, there's still probably a role where a lawyer can help guide or advise or represent. Currently, the majority of the pro bono attorneys that are participating in our program are based in the Denver metro area. As we're growing, we hope to expand our geographic reach and in terms of also attorneys in other parts of the state. And so where legal assistance outside of the Denver metro area may be needed. Currently, it may be limited in some respects. However, for a lot of legal needs as well, perhaps if the survivor needs guidance or advice, or there could be work that could be done remotely, lawyers that are far away can still help. And that's where technology really has a critical role to play, especially community organizations and survivors that are in more isolated or isolated parts of Colorado or parts that don't have as many legal resources, may not know as many lawyers. This is a really great way to connect to lawyers far away that could help. Maybe someone would be able to travel for a court appearance and sort of in-person representation, but if not, because that could be difficult, there could still be other ways that they can assist in terms of advice and guidance and perhaps some of this sort of long distance form of work. And this provides a screenshot of how this looks. So even with that earlier example with Jesse, with the scenario of Jesse coming in through the doors of a service provider, if you remember, Jesse had different needs. There was a need to work through an arrest warrant, to work through a housing eviction, to work through debt that's accumulated and was oppressive. And so each of these specific legal needs actually go into the system as a separate request. As you see, there's sort of 3 different tasks. So they would go in, each need goes in as a separate task so that it could go out to different lawyers, so that once that goes out and it's matched, and as there are lawyers that read that response and believe they can help, they're willing to assist, they send their information back to the community partner who posted. That community partner will then get a list of all the lawyers who responded, and they can coordinate with the survivor at their own time. And the idea is that they now have all these options of multiple lawyers and lawyers from different areas of law, so that that arrest warrant, maybe because it's criminal law, just goes to those criminal lawyers and requires those criminal lawyer skills being different than that debt collection specialist that is used to negotiating with debt collections companies. So these would be 2 different lawyers for 2 different needs, but coming into the service provider in a centralized and organized way, so the service provider isn't running around and chasing people. So again, the lawyers are coming from family, criminal, and civil law. So at this time, not for immigration law. However, sometimes there are, if you're working with immigrant populations, there may be related legal issues that are not immigration issues, but maybe family, criminal, or civil law issues. So that could still come into play. And this tool, again, is a way for survivors to connect to lawyers quickly, to be able to navigate the complexity of the legal system, to have access to a professional that explains their rights, that explains their options, that can support them going forward. And that immediate element, that immediate real-time needs matching element also makes sure that less time is wasted, and we're all as organized and coordinated as we possibly can. So these are some of the benefits. I wanted to make sure also to share some resources on human trafficking that complement our work and may be different than our work, but are critical for what you're doing. And so depending on where you're at with supporting human trafficking survivors, whether you're still trying to get a better grasp on how to identify them, is this even happening in the populations that you serve, or if you're trying to access other services or trying to understand more the intersection between human trafficking and sexual assault, we wanted to share some resources here. So of course, CICASA is a wonderful resource that you are already familiar with, and they have, of course, the Get Help page that lists out actual specific services in Colorado and elsewhere that are relevant to your work and to supporting survivors. They also have, of course, past webinars and blogs and a lot of very important information that explores human trafficking and sexual assault. In Colorado, we have the CONET hotline, which is a 24-hour hotline that you can call for a range of reasons related to human trafficking. If there's a tip to give to law enforcement about potential trafficking situations, if you or the survivor has a request for specific resources or to request training. COVA provides very important case management and services for human trafficking survivors, so we have them on here. The Colorado Human Trafficking Council has also developed further training and support with identifying survivors, and so you can contact them to arrange a training if you have a group or for your organization that can address that stage. There's also really great resources available through NSVRC, which really is tailored to human trafficking and at the intersection of human trafficking and sexual assault. So really great resources and information there, including this packet that we referenced. And we have the National Human Trafficking Hotline, which is run by Polaris, which offers a wide range of information and resources on human trafficking, including on relevant laws and different types of trafficking and resources that are available for survivors throughout the U.S. So these are some resources. And as I'm rounding it up and getting ready for your questions, I want to make sure that you have our contact information. If you have, if you're interested in this program, if you're interested in understanding these resources, if you have a need right now, reach out to me or Kristen Berg, our Director of Outreach and Partnerships, at that email that I provided, connect@alightnet.org. We could set up a call and discuss your situation, discuss the best way to engage, to address the kind of needs that you're seeing. You know, we shared our program about connecting through a community partner, but we also have other opportunities if you are seeing a lot of survivors, so we can work around that. And so definitely let's talk about that. So as I'm rounding out here, we talked about some signs, and we talked about also legal issue spotting. Which is a first year of law school type of training. So thank you for bearing with me for that legal angle, but it's really quite important about really seeing problems and just sort of switching your lens and realizing, wow, the need for concrete services is actually a need for concrete legal help. And hopefully you found those examples helpful, and we're happy to work more on that. And so thank you as you've stayed on the line and as I've had your attention. It's really, really exciting that you're all here and that there's such an outpouring of interest for this, because we are so happy to be working together and are very interested in together learning and addressing the basic legal needs of survivors and helping them fight for justice, helping them rebuild their lives. So I will pause here and see if there are some questions, and please always feel free to, if we don't get to your question or if a question comes up later, to reach out to us.
Hello everyone again, this is Josh. So I do want to just urge everybody that if you have any questions or any comments, please type those in and we will bring them up to the presenter. But our first question here, Mariana, is what is a good way to ask victims if they are being forced into trafficking?
Wow, that is, I don't know if there is a good way, and I would have to say, if we can have a separate conversation with that offline as well, and figure out how to connect you to those support services that can help train you through that. Our expertise really comes in with connecting you guys to lawyers, but as this question mentions, it is really important. How do you even broach it? I would say a lot of this goes back to your training as well as advocates, and as you're working in the sexual assault context, these are very touchy topics. You definitely don't want to broach a topic too early or label someone or instill any kind of traumatization. And so I do not feel comfortable, as that is not my specific area of expertise, but I can put you in touch with those that can coach you through that. And that is a very important question to be asking, because it shows that you're alert to how this is a sensitive situation. You don't want to just say, oh, I read I read some red flags, and I know exactly, I think I spotted a survivor. Now I'm going to tell you who you are. No, these are very complex situations. So thank you for this question, and please reach out to us, and we can get you connected to some coaching and some extra resources on that.
Wonderful. Thank you for that response. And then we did also have another participant who chimed in and said, in regards to the last question, you must be careful because you can cause additional trauma. And I really think that was what you were speaking to, Mariana, in terms of like the labeling and just needing to be very cognizant about the language choice that you're using when you're doing intakes with survivors.
Exactly, exactly. That earlier point, and we just touched on it, but that self-identification of survivors, first of all, many people in general don't really understand what human trafficking is because it is that new concept, but definitely survivors. They're just having an experience, they're walking through the door, and especially if it's sex trafficking, you'd have a lot of additional stigma attached to it, so you want to tread carefully. But please reach out to us and we'll link you up.
Our next question is there a deadline in order to claim for civil damages?
We would have to talk more about the circumstances, and it would really be the conversation that the individual attorney that's matched would have with the survivor about all those details. So it's a little bit too specific to have in this context. But again, I'd love to hear more about what your concerns are and what you're seeing, and we can advise further.
Our next question is, do you have any resources for providers that assist trafficked survivors?
Resources, well, we have, can I hear more about the types of resources? The list of resources that we have, especially on that slide 28 in Colorado, is a really good place to start. Again, CICASA for that sort of first step and navigating human trafficking and sexual assault, the CONET hotline for connecting to various other resources throughout Colorado, COVA providing case management, and Colorado Human Trafficking Council could provide support to the organization with identification and with that trauma-informed training also that was mentioned in the earlier question.
Thank you for your response. Our next question is, if you suspect someone is a victim and they live in an area you are not familiar with, and you call the local law enforcement and no one calls back, what is your suggestion on how to get law enforcement to respond, especially those not working with an agency? Some are fearful of reaching out for help because of the trafficker taking revenge potentially.
Yes, and that's a very important point because there's just so many dynamics that are going on. A good place to start would be to call the CONET hotline, as they tend to have, and even ask a broader question and talk to them about their connections with law enforcement in different regions, because there is such a diversity of situations that are happening. But sometimes there could be a good way to consult with CONET to have a kind of a safer approach or a more anonymous approach to law enforcement if that's appropriate.
Wonderful, thank you. And I actually think I wrapped two questions together that weren't necessarily supposed to be. So especially those not working with an agency, some that are fearful, that was actually connected to the do you have resources for providers question.
Okay. So hopefully I've answered that with the list of resources and then CONET as sort of as an option to discuss with them if they have suggestions, if they have relationships with law enforcement or experience working with them previously and can advise.
Wonderful. Well, That is all of the questions that have come in at this point. So I would just like to say thank you, Mariana, and I am getting a whole lot of thank yous typed
Oh,
in the chat box here. Many, thank you for the information, wonderful presentation. So just wanted to provide you that feedback. We had wonderfully 72 people in attendance at one point
wow.
during the webinar. So just want to thank you again for providing this presentation, and then also just the work that you're doing with the pilot project at ALIGHT. I know when I was doing direct client services, I would have loved to have a resource like this. So thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you, Josh, and thank you everyone for coming in and having your questions and working on this. I really appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to working together.
As are we. Hope you have a great day, Mariana, and thank you to everybody that was in attendance today. Please reach out to either Mariana or myself if you have any follow-up questions, and we will look to get you answers. Hope everyone has a great day. Take care.